You're going to do exactly what I tell you, or you'll regret it, Damien Crowe hissed, his fingers tightening around Imani Harper's arm as he dragged her down the narrow hallway behind the Meridian, Chicago's most exclusive restaurant. The air smelled faintly of bleach, wine, and the remnants of a 5-course gala dinner, mingling with tension so thick it felt almost tangible. Imani, 27, had spent 3 years building a reputation for composure, precision, and intelligence, quietly navigating a world of privilege, bias, and unspoken hierarchies. Tonight, all of that was tested. Mayor Stanton, one of the city's most powerful men, had left a neatly folded envelope with $10,000, masked as a tip, hoping Imani would turn a blind eye to Damien's manipulation of gala invoices. She had simply said, "No, you insolent little girl. You think you can lecture me? You're just a server. People like you should be grateful to even be here." Damien spat, pressing her against the wall. His words dripped with condescension, the kind that masked cruelty as authority. What Damien didn't know was that Imani had been preparing for this moment for 6 months. Hidden in her apron pocket, a tiny recorder captured every humiliating word, every illegal scheme, every act of harassment, preserved as evidence for a confrontation he would never see coming. "Let's have a private chat in the storage room," Damien whispered, his grip tightening. "Maybe then you'll understand your position here." "You don't want to do that, Mr. Crowe," Imani replied, calm and unwavering, her voice steady even as her heart pounded with adrenaline. "And who's going to stop me? Your little husband," Damien sneered. "That failed mechanic you married?" From the shadows near the rear entrance, a tall man stepped forward. His presence was commanding, his movements deliberate, and his eyes were cold, calculating, unwavering. "I'd suggest you release my wife immediately," the man said, voice slicing through the tension like a blade. Recognition dawned on Damien's face. Adrian Vale. Imani allowed herself the first faint smile of the night. She had kept her marriage to Adrian secret for 3 years. He was one of Chicago's most powerful figures, a man whose discretion and intelligence were legendary. Yet she had chosen to operate independently, building her own reputation. Adrian stopped a meter away, his gaze icy and precise. "You have 3 seconds to explain why you are touching my wife," he said, calm and deadly. Damien's grip loosened immediately, as if letting go of her burned him. I didn't know. It's a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" Adrian repeated, savoring each syllable. "You called my wife an insolent little girl and dragged her to a place without cameras. That seems far too specific to be a misunderstanding." Imani watched Damien falter. For 2 years, he had humiliated her daily, seeing her only as a black server with no power, no connections, and no agency. He had assumed that mockery, manipulation, and threats would always keep her in her place. Now he was about to realize just how wrong he had been. Imani's fingers brushed against the recorder hidden in her apron pocket. "I have recordings," she said, pulling it out slowly. 45 recordings, 30 photographs, 62 detailed reports. Every insult, every bribe, every illegal transaction, cataloged and sent weekly to my husband. For 6 months. Damien's face turned pale. You recorded me?" "I did," she said, her tone calm but firm. "You assumed that because I am black and because I work as a server, I could be dismissed, controlled, and silenced. That was your first and last mistake." Adrian's lips curved ever so slightly. He had hesitated when Imani proposed working undercover, concerned for her safety. Yet her strategic mind had already foreseen this confrontation, and the results were about to unfold. Damien's last line of defense surfaced. "I can explain. I have information on competitors, Other restaurants. Adrian tilted his head, exuding deadly patience. Information we don't need. My wife wasn't here to gather intelligence. She was here to gather evidence. Evidence of corruption, harassment, and crime. Amani reached under the counter and pulled out a sleek black leather briefcase. Damien's eyes widened. For months, he had assumed the case contained sales reports or minor complaints. What he didn't know was that it contained a complete dossier. Bribes, tampered invoices, photographs, recordings, and meticulously documented harassment reports. "Do you remember telling me I should be grateful for having a job?" she asked, flipping through the folder. Specifically, March 15th, when Mayor Stanton deposited that campaign bribe into the restaurant's account. "You thought no one would notice." Damien's hands shook. "I'll call Stanton. He'll fix this." "Go ahead," Adrian interrupted softly. "But Stanton is being arrested at his residence for fraud as we speak." Damien's knees buckled, his empire collapsing in seconds. Every ally he had relied upon, every political connection he had cultivated, was already under federal scrutiny. Operation Silver Plate, a months-long joint task force of the FBI, IRS, and Chicago police, had monitored him relentlessly. Every move, every conversation, every transaction documented. "You gave us exactly what we needed," Adrian said, voice low and measured. "A man abusing his power, thinking no one was watching. Predictable, and perfectly captured." Later that evening, Amani returned to her apartment, a modest but meticulously organized space. She placed the recorder, photographs, and documents on her dining table, reviewing each piece of evidence. 6 months of covert investigation, hundreds of hours of observation, and countless small risks had built to this moment. Each photo told a story. Damien altering receipts, making racist comments to colleagues, touching female staff inappropriately, bribing politicians. Each recording captured his arrogance, cruelty, and belief in his untouchable status. She reflected on the months spent carefully planting cameras, documenting meetings, and quietly gathering evidence. No one noticed her meticulous planning. Every small humiliation she endured at work became another building block for justice. Her phone buzzed, Adrian checking in. She smiled. "It's time," she typed. The culmination of her patient, strategic work was finally set into motion. The hallway felt narrower than ever. Damien's legs wobbled as he faced Amani, Adrian, and the approaching footsteps of federal prosecutor Nadia Cullen. The tension was palpable. The faint hum of the restaurant's refrigeration units seemed deafening. "Nadia Cullen," Adrian said calmly, nodding to the woman in the dark suit. "This is the moment you've prepared for." Amani pulled out the black leather briefcase, flipping through page after page of meticulously documented evidence. Photographs, recordings, detailed annotations, and financial statements all testified to Damien's pattern of corruption and abuse. "Damien Crowe," Nadia began, her voice precise and commanding. "You are under arrest for money laundering, tax evasion, racial discrimination, and conspiracy to commit federal fraud." Damien's color drained. I can explain. I have a family, children." Adrian's eyes narrowed. "Funny you mention family. You should have thought of them before laying your hands on mine." Amani's fingers hovered over another folder, revealing photos that made Damien stagger. Him at a bar bragging about controlling staff of color, altering invoices, and touching a fellow sommelier inappropriately. 43 restaurants. Damien. Nadia continued. Copies of all documentation sent overnight to the authorities and affected parties. Every employee you humiliated, every client you defrauded, now has indisputable evidence. Damien's eyes darted. "My ex-wife, she won't." She has already filed for a full review of your divorce settlement, Adrian interjected. Your actions directly altered custody and financial obligations. Damien fell to his knees, hands over his face. The carefully constructed world he had controlled with arrogance and cruelty crumbled in moments. You underestimated me, Imani said, stepping closer. You underestimated my intelligence, my patience, and my strategy. You saw only skin color and profession, not the mind and determination behind them. Outside, sirens wailed. Federal agents swarmed the Meridian, coordinating entry points, securing evidence, and preparing to escort Damien out. The following morning, Damien Crowe sat in a stark holding cell, the gravity of his actions sinking in. He had been stripped of power, wealth, and reputation. The news had exploded across Chicago and national media. Politicians arrested, judges removed from office, and prominent businessmen implicated in systematic corruption. On television screens in the press room, Imani Harper appeared, standing calmly before reporters. The hashtag Imani Harpervale began trending worldwide, and social media erupted with praise, memes, and campaigns inspired by her courage. Former staff members Damien had demeaned found new opportunities. Maria, a line cook he had mocked relentlessly, now managed 3 restaurant locations under the new Harpervale certification. Jessica, the sommelier he had harassed, opened her own wine consulting firm, funded discreetly by Adrian and Imani. Even Damien's closest political allies were collapsing. Mayor Stanton, Judge Whitmore, and several other officials faced charges ranging from money laundering to obstruction of justice. Damien's name became synonymous with arrogance, prejudice, and self-destruction. 3 months later, Imani stood at the podium in the Chicago Conference Center, receiving the National Anti-Corruption Award. Mayors, CEOs, activists, and journalists applauded, some rising to their feet. Being underestimated can be the greatest superpower, she said, her voice steady and commanding. Every insult, every humiliation, every injustice became evidence. Prejudice blinds people to reality, and arrogance blinds them to their own vulnerability. Her keynote included anecdotes from the investigation, highlighting microaggressions at the Meridian, strategic patience, and the months of careful documentation. Students, journalists, and civic leaders listened intently, captivated by the story of resilience, intelligence, and strategic execution. Imani founded the Harpervale Center for Investigative Integrity, a training institute for aspiring investigators, journalists, and legal professionals. The Meridian became the first chain of restaurants certified corruption-free, and employees who had once been targets of abuse rose to leadership roles, empowered and respected. Damien received weekly lawsuits, civil penalties, and public humiliations from former victims. His former clients blamed him for their exposure. His ex-wife had regained full custody of their children. He was becoming a case study in law schools on how prejudice and arrogance destroy individuals. Meanwhile, Imani's influence expanded internationally. She consulted with governments in Europe and Asia on anti-corruption measures, spoke at international conferences, and trained investigators in undercover techniques. Chicago implemented mandatory audits for discrimination and corruption in businesses with over 20 employees, inspired by Imani's work. Social movements arose, driven by her story, encouraging young women and minorities to resist systemic prejudice and corruption. Her transformation became more than personal victory. It reshaped city policies, social consciousness, and professional standards in multiple countries. Imani's lectures at Harvard, Yale, and Stanford introduced students to undercover investigation, strategic patience, and evidence-based justice. She advised UN committees on ethical governance and anti-corruption policies. "The greatest power," she said in one speech, "is using what others underestimate about you. Is turning invisibility into strategy, humiliation into motivation, and oppression into opportunity. The world underestimates those they assume are powerless, and they always pay the price." Her story inspired students, policymakers, and investigators worldwide. Social media campaigns encouraged young women and minorities to embrace their intelligence and strategic potential, transforming perceptions about race, gender, and ability. Damien, now a cautionary tale, remained trapped in his self-created web of arrogance and prejudice, while Amani Harper Vale continued to build a legacy of justice, integrity, and influence that spanned the globe.